If you had told me a year ago that I'd become the most talked about man in my neighborhood because of an inflatable airplane slide, I would have laughed, shaken my head, and asked what you were drinking. But that was before the tornado, before the locked doors, before a woman with a clipboard and a God complex decided that a form was more important than a family's safety. And before I decided that if I had to choose between following her rules or keeping my neighbors alive, I'd choose the second option every single time. It all started on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Fairwood Ridge, Oklahoma. That's the name of our HOA-governed suburban wonderland. Rows of identical beige houses, HOA bylaws thicker than the Bible, and a president named Linda Rowe who ran the place like a one-woman regime. You think I'm exaggerating? The woman once fined a guy for leaving his Christmas lights up until January 3rd. She's the kind of person who carries laminated violation notices in her purse like breath mints. Anyway, I was working from home that day debugging a piece of flight control software for a client contract. The cat Muffin was asleep on my lap, purring so loudly she sounded like a miniature motorboat. I had a cup of coffee going cold, a Spotify playlist full of ambient synths humming through my speakers, and the kind of peace that made you believe suburbia had some upside. Then the siren started. That low, guttural moan that starts like a whisper and quickly becomes a scream. At first, you think it's just a distant train or maybe an ambulance. But then your phone lights up with a red banner. Tornado warning. Take shelter immediately. I froze for a second. Not from fear, just disbelief. The forecast hadn't even mentioned storms. But outside, the clouds were already turning that eerie greenish gray that you only ever see in movies and Midwestern nightmares. I scooped up Muffin, grabbed my go bag from the hall closet, and bolted out the door. My destination, the HOA Community Storm Shelter, supposedly one of the major perks of Fairwood Ridge. They had bragged about it in the welcome packet when I bought the house. Reinforced concrete, stocked with supplies, big enough for 24 people. Built into the park at the center of the neighborhood like a wartime bunker hidden in plain sight. As I sprinted through the park, the wind already tugging at my jacket, I saw other families doing the same. People clutching kids and pets, running with panicked determination. I got to the shelter door and grabbed the handle. Nothing. It was locked. I stared at the gleaming new sign taped to the door, laminated, of course. It read, "Shelter access requires 24-hour advance reservation. Per HOA Bylaw 14C. No exceptions. LR. LR. As in Linda Rowe." I turned and saw her standing there, 20 feet away, arms crossed over her HOA-issued beige safety vest. She was watching us like a prison warden. Her expression said everything. We were breaking the rules. "Linda," I shouted over the rising wind. "You need to open the shelter." She raised one perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Did you file a reservation request?" "A reservation? It's a tornado, not a dinner party. The rule ensures orderly access and prevents overcrowding." That was the moment I knew she wouldn't budge. Not even for the crying toddler beside me or the elderly man clinging to his cane. Not even for a literal act of God bearing down on her kingdom. I clutched Muffin to my chest and ran back home. And that was when I remembered the slide. 3 years ago, at a surplus aviation auction in Arizona, I bought a decommissioned Boeing 747 emergency evacuation slide. Why? Honestly, it was a mix of curiosity, nostalgia, and boredom. I told myself it'd make a fun garage decoration. My friends told me I needed therapy. But in that moment, it wasn't a joke. It was a plan. I hauled the slide out from the back of my garage, still wrapped in faded canvas and stenciled with serial numbers. It was big, about the size of a love seat, and weighed at least 200 pounds. My hands were shaking as I positioned it at the top of the stairs that led into my basement. Neighbors had followed me, Dave and Kim from next door, their 2 kids, an elderly man named Mr. Abbott, a few others. They looked confused, desperate, hopeful. "Trust me," I said. "This'll work." I pulled the red T handle. For a second, nothing. Then the hiss. A screech of compressed air, followed by an eruption of yellow as the slide inflated faster than I could process. It unfurled with a mechanical growl, pressing against the garage walls, forming a smooth, cushioned ramp that led straight into the basement below. I turned to my neighbors with a manic grin. "All aboard." Muffin went first, squirming as I gently placed her on the slope. Then the kids, laughing in amazement. One by one, The others followed, faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. The wind outside roared, shaking the garage door like a drum. Then I jumped down into the darkness. The basement was musty, unfinished, and dimly lit by our phone flashlights. But it was safe. We huddled there, 15 people, and a cat listening as the tornado passed. It was the sound of chaos, of rooftops tearing, trees shattering, windows exploding. But we were okay. When it was over, we climbed out. My garage was intact. My slide, still inflated, bright yellow and glorious, spilling onto the driveway like some surreal monument to petty rebellion. That's when Linda reappeared. She took one look at the slide and went pale. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her hands clutched her clipboard. And then, as if on cue, the police arrived. Not sirens blaring emergency response, mind you. Just a patrol car. Because of course she had called them. 2 officers stepped out. One older, mustache and all. The other younger, trying not to laugh. Linda marched up. Officers, thank God. This man has deployed an unauthorized structure on his property in violation of multiple codes. The older cop looked at the slide, then at me. This yours? I nodded. Used it to get people into my basement. The community shelter was locked. Because they didn't reserve it. Linda shrieked. The cop stared at her. Then he sighed. Ma'am, I think we're done here. But Linda wasn't. A week later, I got a letter. For violations. Fines totaling $2,800. They fined me for saving lives. So I fought back. I called a guy named Frank Kowalski, goes by Frank the Tank. He's a local contractor with a reputation for malicious compliance. He showed up in a truck that looked like it ran on vengeance. I told him my plan. He laughed for 10 straight minutes. 2 weeks later, we broke ground. We built a storm shelter in my front yard. A big one. Reinforced concrete, submarine-style hatch, ventilation periscope, and a dirt berm shaped like a mini volcano. All perfectly legal. All within code. Linda lost her mind. She sent inspectors. We passed. She sent lawyers. We countersued. The neighbors loved it. Kids named it Fort Muffin. I started getting baked goods from strangers. I wasn't just the slide guy, I was a folk hero. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. Linda launched into a speech about community standards. I stood up. Can you explain why HOA dues were spent defending a decision that endangered lives? Silence. Then shouting. Then a vote. I was elected HOA president. My first act? Repeal the shelter reservation rule. My second? Replace the lock with a keypad. Code 1234. Emailed to every resident. Third, legalize gnomes, flamingos, and other whimsical yard decor. Linda moved out. And I stayed. Sometimes, you don't want to lead. You just want to be left alone. But when the people in charge start confusing power with purpose, someone has to step up. Now I sit on my porch, watching the sunset reflect off the yellow hatch in my yard. Muffin purrs beside me. Dave brings over a cold beer. Storm's coming, he says. Let it, I reply. Because we're ready. And if you're ever wondering what one person can do in the face of tyranny, just remember the slide. It wasn't just inflatable. It was unstoppable. If you've ever faced down an HOA tyrant, or just had to fight for what's right in your neighborhood, share your story in the comments. Was I justified, or did I go too far? Let's hear your take. Like, subscribe, and stay defiant, one laminated bylaw at a time.